Full room. This is fantastic. Hi, everyone. My name is Anna Eskamani. I am proud to be on the steering committee for this conference and very grateful for everyone who's joined us. I hope it's been a fulfilling and insightful day so far. Most folks know me for the many hats I wear in our community. I am a proud UCF student and graduate. I'm getting my PhD right now in public administration. And of course, I'm proud to serve District 47 in the Florida legislature. Before I ran for office, I actually was in the nonprofit sector. And so many folks know I worked at Planned Parenthood for 6 years. And so the issues impacting the nonprofit sector are really, really important to me, not only as a former nonprofit professional in the field, but now as both an academic and someone who works in nonprofits day to day as a lawmaker. We know that nonprofits are filling in so many gaps that government has failed to do, but it's so important as we work together in the nonprofit sector that we are leading with our values. And I'm really excited about this session because the subject itself, I think, is one that is really, really important to us, but especially at this moment of time. We see around the country protests and calls for action around issues of racial injustice. We see folks across the country profess Black Lives Matter, pushing for accountability on issues like police brutality. But we also have to take ourselves with a mirror, because the reality is that issues of white supremacy don't just exist in institutions like law enforcement, they actually exist everywhere, right? And I say that also as a lawmaker working in government in Florida. A lot of these institutions were built by a certain type of person to operate in the preference of a certain type of person, right? And so if we're in an effort to truly build a community, a neighborhood, a state and country of equity, requires us to take a serious look within our organizations to see what we can do to challenge these systems that are oppressive in nature, even within the nonprofit sector. And there are so many progressive organizations that still have a lot of work to do. And so we're going to be talking about that in the next hour or so. And I feel really, really lucky to have two colleagues and friends who are going to be really the leading voices for today's conversation. I do want folks to know that, before we get started, as you have questions or comments, please use the chat. We want to hear from you as we're having this dialogue. Our intention is for it to be a really safe and organic space. And if you haven't introduced yourself in the chat yet, that gives both Rachel and Will more context to what you're studying, what your interests are. So please feel free to use the chat as a space to get to know each other. And we will have at the very end of our dialogue today, just a request for you to share with us some of your key takeaways in an effort for us to report that out in the larger session at the end of the day today. And so with that said, I'm going to first toss it over to both Rachel and Will, our two speakers today. Both come from the Peace and Justice Institute at Valencia College, which I am proud to be an advisory board member of for years now. And so they're going to go ahead and give us a background to themselves in this work. And then we're also going to play a preview video of the Peace and Justice Institute, so you have that foundation of what they're really about. And so Rachel, I'll pass it to you as the director, and then Will, if you want to share some more background on who you are and how you came to this work as well.
Thank you, Anna, for that, and for Silvana for supporting us today. I am Rachel Allen. I'm the director of the Peace and Justice Institute. Happy to be here with Will Jefferson, my colleague, the community manager, and to see you all. Fatima, it's good to see you. Fatima and I know each other. I want to PJI was born out of a small group of people having a conversation at the college, really, of what would peace look like and justice look like. And a number of years, not too long into it, a couple of my colleagues of color, two men, said to me, Rachel, we need to talk about race. And this is really before I had a great deal of consciousness about the reality of the racial situation we were living in, because I, being kind of an open-minded, educated woman, thought I knew some things, and yet I didn't. And what happened to me was there was this convergence of me meeting a man that I fell in love with and married, who was Willie Allen, who is a Black man, and my colleagues saying there's an issue with race, and me waking up and realizing, because of knowing Willie, having children, having a biracial family, like all this kind of convergence and understanding on a new level, on a deeply personal level, we really do have issues around race that I'm now more keenly aware of. And we have this platform at this school called the Peace and Justice Then Initiative to do some work around this. And all of this kind of brewing. And then we had the death of Trayvon Martin, the killing of Trayvon Martin in 2012. And again, those colleagues saying, what can we do? Because at that point we were pretty impotent, is the word that comes to mind, to talk about this. We did not know how to talk about race. I didn't know what to do. I knew there were problems. We didn't know what to do. We did development work of ourselves and our colleagues, and we started conversations on race. And so at Peace and Justice, what became an institute, now we are an institute, conversations on race and other intersectional pieces, LGBTQ+ and gender and religion and ableism, all these different things have come together, where we have learned how to create a space where people can come together and speak their truth and talk honestly about subjects which, as we all, I think, understand, have been such a barrier in our culture, in our country, to equity, to access, and really to, I think, the democracy that so many of us hope to see, that we're living in. So PGI has been doing this work. We're grateful for it. We're proud of it. And I want you to know we're always learners along with everybody else. So any kind of work that we talk about today in terms of your institution or nonprofits, we have the same issues. We have to do the same work. And hopefully we're modeling that work at Valencia College within the Peace and Justice Institute, and then supporting our community to do some of this work around inclusion, diversity, equity.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. And then William Jefferson, do you want to share more with us about how you came to this work?
So in about 2017, I discovered the Peace and Justice Institute at Valencia College. And previously, I had some experience in investigation and grant writing. And over time, I decided that there had to be some greater call for the skills and the talents that I had. Knowing that Trayvon Martin was killed and seeing the incidents of Mike Brown, I realized that I needed to commit to lifting the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion within our local community. So I serve as the community manager for the Peace and Justice Institute, and my primary goal is to bring awareness to the community and business owners about the deep need, the valuable need for such change and conversations to be acknowledged, not only for myself as a Black man and my family, but for our students at Valencia College. So that is what led me to the work, because we have a promise. We have a promise to promote excellence and opportunity for our students, but also we also have a moral responsibility to create safe spaces for individuals to feel like they can live and they can thrive. So that is why I am a part of the Peace and Justice Institute. That is my primary responsibility in my role currently, just to make sure that we continue to lift this conversation and add value to the needs for diversity, equity, and inclusion.
That's awesome. Thank you, Will. And I'm gonna just share my screen real quick, so please forgive me. Give me 1 second. For folks who just are maybe a little more curious about the Peace and Justice Institute, this is a video highlight that highlights the work of this organization. So it's only 2 minutes long, so I'm gonna play it real quick and you have any sound issues, just let me know in the chat, but hopefully it'll come loud and clear. And this is also, of course, available on PGI's website, and you can reshare it and watch it later as well.
Anna, there's no sound. Anna. Anna. Is she hearing us? Anna? She's not hearing us. Mm-mm.
Sorry about that, y'all. The sound, I couldn't have the chat box open at the same time.
Ah.
That's my bad. We'll post the video link, just an effort to focus on the conversation. But it is a beautiful video that walks folks through the PGI program. And actually what I'll also do is I'll share the link in the chat so that you can know more about PGI as well.
I can share it if you want me to. Can you hear? No, you want to move on? Okay.
I think for now, yeah, we're good. Just in an effort to, focus on the dialogue. But thank you, Rachel. All right, y'all. So with that said, can you tell us more about, in your years at PGI, what have you both learned? I know, Rachel, you mentioned already just the notion of, even as doers of inclusive and diversity work, as folks that are leading the charge on campuses like Valencia, there is still so much more learning to do. And so perhaps you could just share with us, how have you personally grown as leaders at PGI, and how, if at all, you've seen the Central Florida community change around these values of peace and justice?
Well, I think for me, one of the deep knowings that I have today is that in order to do good work, I think in any arena, this idea of whose voices are at the table, who's missing, and what can I do about it, and that really is deeply within me now, because if I put a meeting table together of people to talk about an important subject, and the people sitting at the table, well, if I were left to just my own devices without any kind of intentionality, I would end up at a table with all white women, right? Because we tend toward likeness. Or, if I was a white man, I might end up at a table with all white men. And so understanding that, no, we've got to have some gender diversity here. We need to have different culture, different ethnicity, sexual orientation. I mean, the reality is I sit in so many meetings, and if I had a homogenous group at the table, I'm going to get the same answers that are coming out of the top of my head. And I'm going to miss big, big pieces of information. And when I have an inclusive group of people whose voice is here, who's missing, and we're very intentional, the outcome is so different. Because given my lens, my view of the world, my perception, I don't see the world the way other people see it. In fact, I live in a very different experience than many people. And so, and I don't want to make those mistakes, and I think that's one of the big learnings. And what I would say about the community is, and you all have probably experienced this, still I walk into meetings at organizations or within the community, task forces, where I show up at the table and the meeting it's very homogenous. There doesn't seem to be intentionality around who's sitting at the table. And I then get very worried, because I think we're going to perpetuate these structures and these systems that are in place that we increasingly understand are not serving everyone. And so then I feel like we just in some ways are spinning our wheels instead of doing the good work that I think all of us are here to do. And so that involves hiring practices. It involves putting together committees, task forces, just making sure that we are representing the community and the constituents that we're trying to serve. And again, what I know is that I have to be so intentional. I have to face my own biases. I got to face the biases of the other people in the room, all this stuff, because it's layered and it's thick. And yet, if we do it, number one, it's a lot more fun. It's a lot more interesting, right? It's a lot more real, and the outcomes are a lot better.
So just to kind of repeat back what I'm hearing from you, Rachel, it seems like in our community, we often will walk into a room and either the room looks the same or it's the same leaders that are in the space all the time. And I think it's a reminder of two parts, right? One is that if you are that leader that is always invited to the table because maybe you have great networks or you make contributions or a combination of all the above, maybe your skill set is very valued in nonprofit sectors, you're invited to the table a lot, to think about bringing someone with you or even stepping back and recommending someone else, right? Being thoughtful in that way. And then the other lens that if you're in the position to recruit for a board or to make hiring decisions, that you're also opening up your bias to say, am I actively ignoring applicants for different reasons? So it's kind of like a two-way. Am I interpreting that correctly?
Yes. And am I putting together a team that's going to serve the work because we have different perspectives on this team and diverse voices? Otherwise, I mean, in terms of the PGI's work, but I think in any organization, we're going to make a lot of mistakes.
Well, what do you think to this point?
So I'll talk first from my personal growth that I've had at PJI. I've learned since being with the Institute how to really learn how to speak my truth. Mm-hmm. For so many spaces, I'll just say this, people of color and communities of color have oftentimes had to walk a very fine line in what you say because there was a fear of backlash. What I've learned is the value of a spoken truth, right? Because then I can speak to others that might be struggling with certain identities or certain stereotypes or mental fouls about groups of people. So I have learned that, and that is something that I have taken with me. Also, one thing that stands out in my mind since being there is I learned how to always remain in a place of learning. I think that just because we are leading out on conversations on diversity, equity, and inclusion, that we have reached the epitome of the super being in these conversations. You have to always remain very fluid, very malleable, right? We have to always be in a place where we can continue to grow and continue to hear hard things. I've learned in this role that discomfort really is the place of learning. And that when I'm most uncomfortable, I am also in the deepest level of learning. That is something that I've learned and I've taken along with me in my practice at PJI. Now, for the community, it's almost funny because we in Central Florida felt in many cases that we were doing a great job, and we were on many accounts. But when you talk about the incidents of Breonna Taylor or George Floyd, we really seen the landscape of Central Florida change to say, well, we really didn't do a good job at having this conversation. And a serious conversation that really invokes change. So I've noticed that Central Florida is doing the hard work of trying to have these conversations and trying to bring this awareness to institutions, because we always get into this debate about institutional racism, but people are the things that make up institutions. So we have to give them an opportunity that they can grow and learn. So that is something that I am so excited about, that we have some great leaders who are also in learning. They're in the learning phase right now. And I would hope that every one of you on this call and everyone that continues to lift this work in Central Florida will remain in that position.
Really well said, Will. And I kind of noticed when you were speaking about your personal growth, it seemed that you also expressed some of PGI's principles.
Yes.
And just so folks know, PGI is led by a series of principles of how we treat each other. And I did post that in the chat, and just to kind of read off a few of them: create a hospital and accountable community, listen deeply, create an advice-free zone, practice asking honest and open questions, give space for unpopular answers, respect silence, suspend judgment. These are all just a few of the 13 different principles that PGI not only leads by, but has worked to implement throughout Valencia College. And I do think these should absolutely be considered in your own organizations, because they help to create the space that Will was just talking about. And actually, Will, if it's okay with you, I'm going to stick with you for this next question. I know we talked about this when we were prepping for today's session, that the words diversity, equity, and inclusivity have been known for a long time and tossed around in the nonprofit sector as well. But a lot of people don't really know what they mean. And so what does real change look like around these issues?
So the real change is really first starting out with understanding what is meant. When someone says diversity or inclusion or equity. So for so long, we thought that diversity was almost like the Crayola experience, right? When you walk into a room and there's difference all around us, that we are in fact diverse. But as studies and as researchers are showing, is that through these assessments, we can really see if an organization is truly diverse by the voices that are leading with the policy changes and the procedural developments of organizations, nonprofits, governance, whatever the case may be. And what we have found is that the voice, the crayon box, when you get to the top, seems to be of the same color. And what we have to be intentional about doing is lifting up a place where it's not just what we look like. There's value in difference in skin colors, and male and female, older or younger. Those are great attributes. But if you want to get to the heart of what true diversity is what voices are we missing at the table? How are we missing opportunities to grow as a result of that voice missing? And what can we do to make sure that we are including those voices in the process? So diversity is truly that. It's bringing together a thought. Now, when we talk about equity, I use this example, but it's not just inviting a person to the party and saying, hi, at least you got an invitation. It's truly saying that when they come, here's the list that the DJ is going to play. Please feel free to select as many songs as you want, and we're going to make sure that you can have the opportunity to dance all night long with us. It's an exchanging of power, right? That I'm not going to just hold on to my own preference. I'm not going to go with the majority, but in fact, I'm going to be inclusive. I'm going to be a place where every person feels welcomed and also feels supported, right? And then when you talk about inclusion, how do we all get in the car to go to that final destination, right? So these are how those terms are oftentimes thrown around in the nonprofit sector and in governance and in just regular life. That we're being inclusive, but the reality is we're very inclusive to the people that we are in relationship with and whom we like. We're selective, and we confuse inclusiveness with selection.
Whew, let that sit, y'all. So well said. So well said, Will. I don't know if Rachel, you wanted to add to that too.
No, I mean, you know, what do they say about organizations? The higher you go, the wider you go. I mean, we have to be very frank, and we have to look at our own organizations and know that that is most often the case. And again, I think what has happened for me is that I've recognized that I really don't want to be a part of that anymore. It's not working. It no longer works for me in my personal and professional life. And I don't think it's serving our institutions, our community well. Because when we leave out whole people groups and their gifts and talents, we're depriving ourselves.
Right.
So I just, I think again, but we have to be so intentional. Who was this? Someone just got written up. I read in the paper, I guess it was Wells Fargo, the head of Wells Fargo said, well, we just can't find Black people that can do finance and banking. They're just not there. And that's something that you'll have to be careful and look for that, because that's something you're going to hear. Well, we tried. We just don't find people of color who have these professional skills. We're not looking hard enough, or we're not doing the work that it takes, because people are there. Trust me, amazing professionals are there. It's just that we're gonna have to want that and be intentional.
Right. Well, let's dive deeper into that, right? So we know that so many organizations in the nonprofit sector, especially, that serve communities of color and might even talk about some of these issues, their leadership team, whether it's executive directors or vice presidents or their board, doesn't actually reflect who they serve. And so from y'all's perspective, what are the barriers that either that a person of color might not even feel like they are welcome in this space, or even the barriers when it comes to recruitment and mentorship? Why do we see Wells Fargo make these comments and be okay with it, right? Because I think that's what's probably most frustrating, is that the comments are made, but then they seem totally fine with it. Right? Because you should be outraged by that notion. So what can we do within our institutions to actually ensure that directly impacted people are center of the conversation and of the policy work and of the service, but also that directly impacted people reflect leadership?
Will, do you want me? We do have a saying that goes, DK, we don't know what we don't know. At PGI, we don't demonize people. We are not bad people. Most of us are not, we're not bad people. It's just that, frankly, one can become the head of Wells Fargo and never had an authentic conversation about race and equity. We know that to be true because we don't talk about it in the schools. We don't educate for this. We're not comfortable with it as a people. And so DK, we don't know what we don't know. And yet there's more outrage at this point, right? Because we should know, or we think we should know. So here's what we have to do. We have to start talking to one another. How many people do we know, or how many times have we heard the anecdote, but my best friend at work is Black, right? White woman says it. And then the next question I say is, have y'all talked about race? Well, no, we've never talked about race. Well, so you're saying that one of the most important aspects of this person's identity, their racial makeup, for me, is, I'm a woman, I'm white. These are important things. I'm a woman. Like, I would want to be able to talk about that. So if we're in a relationship, but we're not able to talk about an important aspect of one of our identity, if I'm gay, if I'm a person of color, if I'm whatever it is, maybe I'm hiding the fact that I'm Hindu or Muslim or a pagan, because of some fear that I will be judged and ostracized. This then becomes very problematic. But how do we create a space in a professional environment where people can bring all of themselves into work? I can be who I am. I can be a gay woman, or I can be the faith that I practice, and say, I need this afternoon off because this is my time of prayer. And so having a team meeting on Friday afternoons doesn't work for me, given my faith tradition. So it's going to mean doing some things differently in our places of work. It's going to mean having some space created where we can talk to one another and know one another. And I will tell you, those principles really do that, because they teach us to suspend judgment, speak our truth, turn to wonder, check assumptions, Because I have had an experience in a small community group that would mirror a lot of these nonprofits where everything was good, you know, in the room until the one night when things weren't good because somebody brought up a difficult conversation around race. And then it blew up. And what I know about that group is that we didn't have structures in place, like the principles that lay a foundation that say we can have these difficult conversations without blowing up, without getting afraid, and without tearing ourselves down. Because, you know, really, if people are going to tell us the truth, they're going to tell us that they've been hurt, that they felt left out, they haven't felt heard. They're going to tell us a lot of things that, you know, I need to be prepared to absorb that I've done that. I've done it unintentionally, because again, I'm not a bad person, but I didn't know. But I will tell you, if someone has the courage and there's a space when someone can tell me these things, now I know. And let me tell you, as a manager, supervisor, boss, executive, I'm going to do everything in my power to create spaces where I do not harm people in the future and where they can be honest and real and open and they can tell me if it's happening. And I'm sure we're not perfect at PJI. Of course we're not. And hopefully we have a space where people can come and say, this is not working here. And we're open to learning. And I think that's what Will was saying earlier. I've got to stay open. I've got to be teachable because I'm going to make mistakes. Because there's so many things I don't know about other people, identity, difference.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rachel. Will, what do you think?
So your question put a smile on my face because it comes down to what we call structural racism. And in that term, it normally refers to the way that society builds institutions or structures in an attempt to exclude certain groups of minorities from participating in economic, political, and social capital. So when you talk about opportunities for organizations to have mentorship or for communities of color to feel empowered to have a place in these types of rooms, at these tables, we have to also understand that they've, in most cases, have probably gone through school, K through 12, and if they were lucky enough to go to a college, they've been confronted with white culture. And many times there's a building up that has to take place. Because for so long, you have to also fight the stereotypical language that, you know, they're lazy. They're not going to finish the job, or they're full of problems, or they're overly aggressive. So then when you get into a space where a situation or something comes up and you really want to speak into it, if you put too much passion behind your voice, you're angry, or you know you're overzealous with your approach. The reality is it's going to take a lot of self-building, self-care, a lot of relearning to feel okay and be okay with speaking your truth, like I said earlier, because that is what it's going to take to empower communities of color that for so long have these narratives painted about them. Now, when I look at Wells Fargo and them being able to put that into the newspaper, it shows you that I would question how much work is really being done at that institution. And I would also question which voices are really leading that narrative. And it won't surprise me what it is. So we just have to create spaces where we can keep having conversations, keep uplifting one another, to come into a real acknowledgement that it exists. You know, we can't say if cancer is cancer, we can't go around saying that cancer doesn't exist when we know that there are causes or casualties as a result of this illness. We can't say it doesn't exist, but we have to do the work to address it. And that is what this is all about, finding the strength within ourselves in a group of people that we can call allies, and if that's problematic in today's conversation, co-conspirators, that help you lift this work, to help these narratives, to change these conversations, find them. I would also say that it's also very important for our people of privilege. And I'm not just saying white privilege, because as an African-American man, I have privileges as well that certain groups within my culture do not. If I have an opportunity to create a bridge, it is my responsibility to do so. It's my opportunity to pull out a chair at the table and invite them to speak, invite them to ask questions, invite them to do something that otherwise they probably would never have the opportunity to. And know that I'm supporting them, we're supporting them, you're supporting them, and that they'll see themselves through to the other side. So that would be how I would address many of these situations that are happening. Just knowing that what I can change, I'm going to work to do it.
Well, and that last part, Will, too, of just what I can change, I'm going to do it, I think is a good reminder for folks not to be overwhelmed by this work. I mean, let's be real, this has been a really tough week for anyone who cares about this topic. I mean, from Breonna Taylor to even here in Florida, you know, our governor pursuing a path that's more aggressive towards calls for Black Lives Matter versus actually talking about it. And I know that I know that for me personally, it can be demoralizing. And of course, for those that identify as Black, even more challenging. And so to also just ground ourselves in what you can do at your neighborhood, at your nonprofit, you know, in your faith-based group and your friend circle, you know, not to be overwhelmed by it, because we're not going to, one person is not going to solve all these issues, right? And face all these challenges. So you really got to just focus on what you can do in your sphere. And to echo Rachel's point earlier, be intentional. I think intentional is one of the most important words for this session. Is none of this happens organically. You really do have to think and push yourself to think who's missing from the room. Did what I say make sense, or was it offensive or inaccessible to different communities and so forth? And I want to remind folks too, we're about to approach our Q&A segment. So if you do have questions, you know, bubbling up, please put them in the chat. We want to hear from you, and don't be afraid to, you know, to give us any comments as well. And so as we're waiting to see what questions come in, we'll take a one more look at you know, I'm a very like tangible person. I love specifics, right? So we're talking a lot in like theory and like mission, but let's think about intentional actions that a nonprofit can do, whether it's to dismantle any systematic oppression or racism within the organization, but also to help complement the point you made, Will, about a pipeline, you know, about actually helping support a pipeline of people of color that can, you know, continue to learn and grow within your sector. So do either of you have any you know, tangible thoughts and actions that you've taken in your professional career, or advice for other nonprofits?
Go ahead, Will.
One thing that I would say to this is be intentional about reviewing policies and procedures, right? Make sure that you really do a hard look, like laser focused look on your hiring practices. Those are things that can be done immediately, right? You can literally go back and look at pools of candidates and see what was the reason why certain groups of people didn't make it to the interview. Have conversations with leaders to stress the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And show them through articles such as Harvard Business Review and things of that magnitude, to show them the importance that when you actually incorporate and adopt certain things into your organization, your bottom line not only increases, but employee retention is now low, like you're able to retain more employees. which makes for a healthier organization, a happier organization. Also, if you have not, really take the time to evaluate a diversity statement for your organization. Keep yourselves accountable. You know, create something that you can hold yourself accountable to. And then you can set goals and strategic plans around it. Give yourself 1 year, give yourself 2 years, and see if you've actually reached that goal. As for people of color, provide mentorship academies where they can sit down and learn the basics of what it feels like to be on a board or to aspire to be on a board. And not just be on any type of board, but in a leadership role on those boards. What does that entail? How do you start to network? Show them strategies on how you can build a networking system of connections within the local community that will then help them flourish and thrive in that space. But also, you have to create a space to allow them to try new things and to support them. So often, people of communities of color, we get into spaces and we're mute or silent on situations because there's a fear that if I'm over talkative, right? If I overly talk, that I could potentially lose my seat. Let them know that there is value in your feelings, your expressions, and we're here to hear them, not to punish you as a result of them, and make it almost like we do at PGI, make it comfortable enough to sit with the truth. If it does not make us feel good, that is oftentimes a reminder or an indication that it is speaking to something that needs to be addressed. So allow that discomfort, like I said earlier, allow that to be the place of learning and growth. Allow yourself to open up to new possibilities. And that's how I would say we can address many of these issues.
Great next steps. Well, Rachel, what are you thinking of?
Well, yes, all of those things. And I'm just thinking at each of us as individuals. I mean, clearly the first action step is within ourselves and to grow our understanding and our knowledge. And I'm thinking about a book by a man named Chowdhury, and I'll put it in the chat in a minute. It's called Deep Diversity. And he's an HR person, he's Canadian. But it's a very good book. I mean, of course, you can read How to Be an Anti-Racist, and you can read, different books about white privilege. There's all different books out there that are trending right now. Deep Diversity gave me just so many insights about how we work together, how we live together, and so just raising my own consciousness, how I'm being. And depending on your position at your organization, my goodness, bring that book and put it on the table at the next team meeting and say, this is the book I'm reading. And maybe we could read this together. I mean, learning together as a team, I think, is a great tool. A lot of people are doing that right now. And I'm hearing a lot of things like, I'm reading this book and it's changing me. Well, of course it does. So educate, but educate together as a team. Bring those principles into when you have the discussion, read the principles. And so to say, we can speak our truth here and we can tell stories that we identify, in terms of what's being talked about in this book. Because if you can, first of all, do the work inwardly where you have some level of comfort talking about these things, because I think that's one of the greatest barriers. Like in the chat, Liz put something about, this is trending and people are putting out their diversity statements. Yeah, but that's going to mean nothing if the person isn't also learning about their own discomfort about this and getting some comfort around talking to other human beings about it, right? It's okay to make a mistake. And then bringing it to the table, to the office, to the team. Because once we open this can of worms and start the conversation, it's not all dealt with, but that's a huge step, just admitting we don't know how to talk about this and we're going to work on it. So educate ourselves, bring that education into the group, invite people in to do the work together and start to grow this culture of learning. And really it's just identity awareness, right? Because the more that I am self-aware, honestly, the more then aware I become of you. Because if I understand myself and all the intricacies and the intersectionalities of my identity, all these big words, right? I'm just so much more open and empathetic and able to know you. So that's what I would say.
Rachel,
Really.
one more thing, because it just came to mind. I'm going to talk from a very personal space. When I first got on with the Peace and Justice Institute, Rachel literally took me to almost every meeting with her for almost the first year. And what that was doing was just what she said, self-awareness. She was building up that confidence, but she was also giving me the tools to know how to handle certain conflicts, certain narratives that might present. She was very instrumental in just making sure that I felt comfortable in my own skin, in my own presence. Not trying to, shape me to be Rachel, not trying to shape me to be any other leader, but allowing that leader on the inside of me to come to be, right? Michelle Obama wrote a book, Becoming, to allow yourself to become the strength, the wisdom, the power that is already in you. So I would also add to that, if you find good and upcoming, outstanding leaders, create an opportunity to bring them with you to those meetings. And even if they do not speak, allow them to own that space, that chair in that room, so that they can feel confident to keep having the conversations and to keep speaking truth to power.
I want to say, first of all, I want to say I really like that you said that, Will, and that means a lot to me. And so I just appreciate and respect you so much. And I remember what was happening was, I had been granted access to City Hall, right? Because we've done diversity classes with City Hall for years now. And because when I walk in City Hall, people know me, that's power, right? I walk into City Hall and people say, "Hi, Rachel." It's really important that I share the power, right? And that's something that I've learned about looking at, about having power, is with whom can I share it to finally get to where we're going. So if the goal is equity and power and sharing power, I want to be super intentional about who's coming to City Hall, right? So that when they walk into City Hall, people say, "Hi, Will," right? And now he's got the power. And because ultimately it does come down to power, and power's not evil. Power's not bad. It's how we utilize that power that matters.
Absolutely. And to also remember that power comes in all shapes and sizes. And some folks have power because of the color of their skin. Some folks have power because of the title next to their name. Some folks have power because of their access to resources or their network. But at the end of the day, like you said, Rachel, it's neither good or bad, and it's not a scarce resource. We can build it together. And when you are bringing Will with you to these spaces, you are building that collective power that everyone benefits from in a really positive way.
Well, and this was something I loved in Chowdhury's book that I'm going to put in the chat, because Chowdhury talks about, in many situations that Will and I are in, Will holds the power because he's the Black man in the room. He's got the experience that I don't have. He has what I need because he has the information to help me become better in this kind of space of understanding difference, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that, and I like that Chowdhury talks about that. Step into our power, because it isn't always that white people in the room have the power. I mean, I told you we were impotent years ago when Trayvon I was impotent. I had no power because I had no knowledge and no agency in this space. And I had to go to people that could teach me. So I think the conversation of power is so important, and understanding that the power changes depending on the dynamic in the room, and to really step into that power whenever you can use it in a positive way, like you're saying, Anna, to bring us, collectively together.
Right. Do you want to add anything else, Will, to that at all?
Oh, and I was just going to say, and it's reverse. So there are certain tables or spheres that I've been in, and you can almost cut it with a knife to know, like, okay, do I really belong here? And Rachel has led,
Mm,
and then she makes it very clear that listen to Will.
mm,
Oh, do you have anything that you would like to share? Sometimes power is a bridge, and that is what
right.
we say at PJI often, that we all have privileges, but privilege is an account that's worth spending. We have to spend down our privilege. And if that's being a bridge, if that's being a rug, if that's being a couch, if that's being a bed, if it's being a boat, whatever it is in this life, you have a responsibility to turn into that so that others can launch off of you. So greatness can be experienced in every part of the world. So that's
Mm.
something that we really truly believe in. And I hope that that story and that honesty helps encourage you all to do some of this work, to find people and allow what you've built to also be a jumping off or a launching pad for other people.
And just listening to you two have this exchange of of love and support and also real talk, it kind of reminds me too of the difference between vertical organizational structures and horizontal, and knowing that we have to have systems of accountability within any organization, especially nonprofits. And we have the org chart, right? Like a nonprofit board oversees the CEO oversees these people, like every nonprofit professional, we know those structures. But we also know those structures originate from the Prussian army. And
Exactly.
those structures are really archaic. And so to think about how do we find horizontal opportunities and leadership structures where everyone is a leader, just like you said, Will, everyone has privilege, everyone's opinion is valued. And to reimagine your organizational charts to see how can I create spaces where the executive assistant is right next to the CEO and their voices are just as valuable, right? And to really try to dismantle the traditional org charts that in many cases don't even offer space to grow and can feel competitive when they don't even need to be competitive. They should be complementary, right? So just another, like takeaway I'm
It's
getting from this conversation too.
Anna, this is so amazing that you're saying this because I don't even think about this, but what you're saying is profoundly true. Okay. Because at PJI, I've had to create one of those things only for like the leadership at the college because they would not understand this thing that I give them, right?
Right,
Because
right.
this is our org chart. And because one of the things you don't know about me is that I'm sober 25 years. And when I got sober, I was living in a halfway house. I was sort of the mother hen for a while, but I was living with anorexics and drug addicts. And, I'm laughing, but it was not great, but then it was hell, right? It was hard for me. But these little 18-year-old girls were bossing me around and telling me what to do because that was what was suggested. Let these women help you, Rachel. Like I needed help too. And I learned that these little 18-year-olds, I was, all of 27, or maybe I was 35 or that, who knows, but they had a lot to offer me and they had a lot of insight. And so when I started doing this kind of work, this kind of diversity work, I realized, okay, so these staff assistants that are maybe part-timers, but they're 20, they're women of color, there's a Muslim woman on our staff. Really? They're not going to be at the table telling us what's going on in
Right,
the world? Like
right, right.
they're going to be in the office when we're having team meetings? Really? How could that be? Because they've got all the information. And I'll tell you, one time at a meeting, it was so wonderful when someone said, they said, I really do feel that our voice we are heard, like we matter. Our opinion or our perspective counts. So yes. Why wait to get their opinion till they're at the top of the org chart? Because this structure is really serving PJI quite well, even though I still haven't figured out how to get it on like the right kind of graph for the college leadership.
Well, and to your point, it speaks to the actions you took when Will joined the team, right? And bringing Will with you in spaces, even if it wasn't necessarily a space where Will, felt like he needed to contribute, at least he knew he could. And I think that alone is part of the mentorship too, right? And trying to
Yes.
break these systems up. And I do see two questions coming in from the chat, so I'm going to grab them real quick. The first one, you kind of already mentioned, Rachel, from Liz, and Liz is a big PGI fan, is what I'm getting from the chat too. And so Liz is kind of speaking to a really important topic right now, which is performance versus actually taking action on issues of racial justice. And so Liz writes, how do you respond to this moment when diversity, equity, inclusion issues are trending, and suddenly organizations might be making statements in support of Black lives, but not taking additional action? How do we not go back to business as usual? And we only have 5 minutes left, so I hate to ask for short responses, but unfortunately time is against us.
Well, can I go first? I would say this. As the organization, you're the ones, the people are the ones to say that we can't return to business as normal, because there truly is no business as normal from this point on. And if we hold our leaders responsible for these changes that we're wanting to see, there's no way that they can back up. So one thing that we do at the Peace and Justice Institute is we go out into the community and we give workshops. And one of the things that I say to leaders all over this county and in the city, in the state and other nations is, you have to stop with the one-offs. Just because one statement was produced does not mean that your organization is done doing continuous work. You have to educate and provide continuous education. You're going to have to remain reflective, meaning turning that mirror on yourself and your organization to see where your blind spots are, and also creating a window of opportunity so that people in your organization and leadership can see a different perspective. You're going to have to model it. You're going to have to be consistent in it. And that is one of the best ways that I can tell business leaders, executive directors, managers, supervisors, how to keep it going and not to feel like it's just, the cool thing to do. Because if we really get down to the gist of it, lives are at stake. And our complicit nature in it means that more lives will either be lost, harmed, and ultimately, overlooked. And we have to stop that narrative and that approach within our own city. So demand it. They have social responsibility clauses. Hold companies hold them accountable to them. And that's the way that we'll do that.
Rachel, what do you think?
Well, I'm just recalling a couple conversations I've had with nonprofit leaders this summer that I think, maybe they were calling us for some kind of help. They didn't call back. And I'm just saying that because Will's shaking his head, because I've just been honest with people, Liz, and with one of these situations, I said, look, until you look at your board, and I guess this was in the height of it all, and I just said, until you're willing to look at the makeup of your board, which is 90% white in an organization that represents the state. I'm not going to give away who it is, but it was appalling, unconscionable. And I told her that. And I said, you've got to start internally, because if you're going to put out all this programming and try to be more diverse in your programming, and yet your board is made up of 90% white people, you are, as Willie likes to say, faking the funk. And it's inauthentic. So I think we've got to look at ourselves. We've got to look at ourselves. The statements are one thing, but if we are not then following it up with looking at the board, looking at the hiring practices, looking at the program we're putting out. I really liked when Flora Maria Garcia held the arts organizations accountable and said, we're going to cut funding year after year after year until you show us evidence that your board is diversifying, your staff is diversifying, and your program is diversifying. I mean, she put her money where her mouth is. And there were organizations in town that literally had their funding cut from the arts, United Arts, year after year after year. And that kind of thing, money talks. So you all, right. A lot of you all support communities, you might give grants, you might leverage, that's a way to hold people accountable. Now I've got my tough, there is a part of me that can get kind of tough on this, because it's tiresome if people are going to talk but not act.
Absolutely. I think those are incredible closing lines from both of you. And I just want to ask if folks wanted to reach out to PGI to speak to their organization, is that something that you are able to provide?
Yes.
Some head nods. Okay. Perfect. Perfect.
Yes,
I'm already
yes,
getting
definitely.
perfect. I'm already getting some private messages of folks asking, can I bring PGI to my organization, to my nonprofit, to my student group? And so you both are so well loved and appreciated. And from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for being a part of our nonprofit conference, being part of this conversation. To everyone who joined us, thank you. Thank you to our Zoom host as well. There is still the closing session, and so please continue to attend the conference sessions through Zoom, and I hope next year this time we'll be back again, but hopefully in person.